afternoon. My name is Stacy Lewis. I'm the Chief Development Officer here at the San Francisco Campus for Jewish Living. Here at SFCJL, we take pride in offering a comprehensive continuum of care that supports the diverse needs of older adults. Our campus includes the Frank Residences, which is an assisted living and memory care community, and also the Jewish Home and Rehab Center, which provides short-term rehabilitation for people recovering from a hospital stay, long-term skilled nursing, and acute geriatric psychiatric support. Together with all of these services, we provide care to 500 people every day and more than 2,500 annually. So that's just a little bit of information for those of you who are new here, but I do see a lot of familiar faces, so it's really good to see you all. If you're interested in learning more about our services, we offer personalized tours tailored to your interests, and it's new, we call it the SFCJL Experience Tour, and I look forward to inviting you to come back and join us on a tour, whether you're looking for a place for you or your loved one to live, or you're looking for opportunities to donate or volunteer. This is the third annual speaker series, and it's generously sponsored by the Julian Davis Lectureship Fund. We named the series this year the Golden Hour for several reasons. In medicine, it is the crucial first hour where quick action can change everything. Golden Hour also calls to mind that warm light at sunrise or sunset, a reminder of the beauty and possibility that comes with age. And for this speaker series, Golden Hour celebrates a time in life that is full of strength, connection, and purpose for older adults and the people who love them. We are very fortunate tonight to welcome Dr. Bob Wachter, our featured speaker, to share his insight on artificial intelligence and healthcare. Dr. Wachter is a UCSF professor and chair of the Department of Medicine. He has been named by Modern Healthcare magazine as one of the most influential physician executives in the United States. In 2020 through 2022, his tweets on COVID-19 were viewed more than 400 million times by his 260,000 followers and served as a trusted source of information on the clinical, the public health, and policy issues surrounding the pandemic. With his leadership roles in academia, hospital medicine, quality and patient safety, and digital health, Wachter is often sought after for his dynamic, thoughtful, accessible, and humorous takes on healthcare's current state and its future opportunities and challenges. He is the author of 300 articles and 6 books, including the New York Times bestseller, The Digital Doctor, Hope, Hype, and Harm at the Dawn of Medicine's Computer Age, and the forthcoming book, A Giant Leap, How AI is Transforming Healthcare and What That Means for Our Future, which comes out in February and which you will all get a copy of at that time. Judging by the impressive turnout in this room and the dozens of people on our waitlist for tonight, it is clear that this topic is of great interest. We are thrilled to have one of the foremost leaders in the field illuminate how artificial intelligence is transforming what it means to care and to be cared for in this extraordinary era of technological advancement. Bob will first share a short presentation, and then we'll be in conversation with Dr. Adrienne Green, our president and CEO. And after that conversation, we will have an audience Q&A, so hold your questions until that time. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bob Wachter.
Thank you, Stacy. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm glad my mom's bio got through on fax to you. I appreciate that. I've been here a few times, largely visiting Adrienne, who has worked with us at UCSF for many, many years. She's an exceptional leader, and you're lucky to have her. And I was thrilled that Adrienne asked me to come down and chat with you about what I think is the most interesting issue in the world today, which is artificial intelligence, and is it good or bad? I'm guessing that a fair number of you have played with it. Raise your hands if you have, by this point, played with ChatGPT or Gemini, so that's pretty amazing. I think a couple of years ago it would have been a handful of people, so it has really changed things. I have become obsessed, and I learned this maybe a few months ago. So I'm co-chairing the strategy plan for the UCSF health system. And my other co-chair is someone Adrienne knows well, Andy Josephson, who's the chair of our Department of Neurology. And we were talking about plans for UCSF Health and growth and expansion and all sorts of stuff. And I kept bringing up, but what about AI? Shouldn't we think about using AI? And finally, Andy, who's a very funny guy, stopped me and he said, tell me again, like, I know your book's coming out, how much money do you make for each copy you sell? And I said, well, I make about $3. He said, if I pay you $4, will you shut the hell up about AI? So I will not, because I actually think it's extraordinarily interesting, extraordinarily important, and you'll see that I'm pretty optimistic about it in healthcare. I'm talking just about healthcare, which is the only thing I know well. I'm not that optimistic about it in the rest of our lives. I worry about jobs and what our kids are going to do or grandkids are going to do. I worry about deep fakes. I worry about what its impact will be on the political system. I think there are a lot of reasons to be quite concerned about it in the rest of the world. I think in healthcare, the opportunity is really very, very powerful, and I think mostly positive. So let me go through that with you. I'll speak for about 20 minutes, and Adrienne and I will chat for a little bit, and then I look forward to hearing your questions as well. I've kind of subtitled this, is this our Hemingway moment? What does Hemingway have to do with this? This is From the Sun Also Rises, Hemingway's 1926 book, in which one of the characters goes bankrupt, and another one says to him, how did you go bankrupt? And his answer was 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. So this is my sense is that healthcare has been undergoing a digital transformation gradually and then suddenly, and this is our suddenly moment, facilitated both by AI and by the vast and I think unmeetable needs of the healthcare system if we don't have something to help us along. People say to me all the time, well, healthcare has been transformed by technology. I'm on my chart and I just got a cardiac ablation and my meds, the doctor was no longer scribbling on a piece of paper but sending it to the Walgreens electronically. And I sort of say, are you kidding me? These are industries that have been transformed by technology. The way you find a place to stay if you go to London or New York, how you get around. I have Uber here, but I could have had Waymo. The way you buy things, the way you get entertainment, the way you get food delivered to you. All those have been truly transformed by technology. And by transformed, I mean that not only do we utterly depend on technology to do these things, but the leading companies in all of these industries 20 years ago are mostly out of business, have been supplanted almost completely by these new technologically driven companies. In the world of healthcare, if you look at America's top 10 hospitals 100 years ago, they were places like Mass General and Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic and UCSF, and you look at America's top 10 hospitals now, they're essentially the exact same list. There's no other industry that I can think of that looks like that, where the leading incumbents 100 years ago are still the leading incumbents today. This is what most of the rest of the economy looks like. And in healthcare, we use some pretty fancy technology. You can be assured at UCSF, if you come and you get an x-ray, we have the fanciest MRI scanners and PET scanners and all of that sort of stuff. But we still have a lot of this. We still are the leading users of fax machines in the universe. We still move a huge amount of information around this way. No other industry does that. I'm guessing that you have a bunch of fax machines here and that you move information from hospitals like mine to your facility and back and forth via fax. Nobody else does that. I will say, though, that at UCSF a year or two ago, we finally ditched the beepers. I used to say a few years ago, the only people who still had beepers were doctors and drug dealers, and the drug dealers got rid of them 5 years ago, but we finally have gotten rid of them ourselves. Now, the digital transformation of medicine has been happening for about 15 years, I would say, really with the advent of the electronic health record. You have a version of it probably through MyChart. That's the patient portal of the electronic health record. The version of the electronic health record we use is a big system called Epic that you may have heard about. And I was incredibly enthusiastic about electronic health records when they came out, just thinking, what could go wrong? I love my iPhone. I love my Mac. It's made my life better and easier. The book I wrote 10 years ago was really about how this went off the rails and went wrong. One of the ways I knew it had gone off the rails was this was a 7-year-old girl who went to see her pediatrician. And she's something of an artist. She drew a drawing of her recollection of the visit to the doctor. And you see there in the middle is the girl, next to her mom, next to her, her sister, and there in the corner, back to the patient, typing away, is the doctor. This is a spectacular drawing. There's only one thing this girl got wrong. Anybody see it? The smile on the doctor's face. I do not know any doctor who is excited and thrilled about the fact that we turned into very expensive data entry clerks. And we spent an enormous amount of time sitting there entering data into the computer, and patients notice. And you probably have noticed yourself that your doctor's not making eye contact because he or she is so busy typing into the computer. So that's kind of one of the examples of things that gone wrong that we didn't predict as we all turned to electronic health records to collect and store our data. Now, before I get to today's AI, I want to just make clear that AI in healthcare is not new. There were efforts to build AI into healthcare in the 70s and 80s. The problems were, first of all, the systems weren't very good. They were kind of clunky. They used a technology that's very different than the technology today. The technology today, large language models and things like that, take just immense amounts of data, sort of crush them together, and basically they're prediction engines. They say what would be the next word in a sentence. The AI back in the 70s, 80s were basically a series of if-then statements. Patient has a sore throat. If they have swollen lymph nodes, then it might be strep throat. If they don't have swollen lymph nodes, then it's most likely to be a virus. Those work well for very, very simple problems, but tend to fall apart as things get more complex. And things in American medicine now are extraordinarily complex, with an aging population on many medicines, with 10 different diseases, all that sort of stuff. So the AI that existed in the 70s and 80s sometimes worked and sometimes gave answers that were sort of absurd. This was captured in this cartoon where this poor fellow has an arrow out of his back, and the doctor says, rapid pulse, sweating, shallow breathing. The computer says you have gallstones. This was the kind of thing that we saw back then. And part of the mistake that the people who were doing AI at the time made was they decided, they had to figure out, like, all right, we have these computers and they can do some things, what should we work on? They decided to work on what they thought was the most interesting problem, which is diagnosis. That was a bad error. What you want to do is start working on the simplest problems to gain quick wins and get everybody's buy-in. And I'll talk a little bit later about what those are in hospitals like mine today. Anyway, this failure, the arrow in the back problem, led to what we call the AI winter. So basically, in my world, and I think about this a lot and study technology and run a huge department, but in my world, I didn't really give AI any thought for about 35 years. It basically, once it flamed out with the arrow in the back, it kind of went off the radar screen for a very long time. And it's only in the past few years that we're talking about it again, and the reason we're talking about it again is this new technology called generative AI. A couple of days ago, November 30th, was the 3rd-year anniversary of the public release of ChatGPT. And I used it on that day, November 30th, 2022. And as soon as I began using it and asking it questions like, can you explain Watergate to an 8th grader? Or tell me a poem about Robert Wachter, MD, in the style of Shakespeare. And it did it. And it was like, oh my God, there was before today and after today, and this is really what has changed things, that this technology is so extraordinary in what it can do, and I think those of you who've played with it have probably gotten a sense of that. People have realized that it's extraordinary in what it can do, and this is the fastest adoption curve of any technology in history. I think, I don't know the adoption curve for fire or the wheel, but it may have been faster, but at least in the modern era, this is the adoption curve. ChatGPT went from 0 to 100 million users in the space of a few months. And you see the curve for other technologies that became enormous, things like Spotify or Facebook or Netflix took many, many days and in fact years to achieve that kind of adoption. So this was a technology, and to me it was, before I saw ChatGPT, I thought a Google search was fine. I thought that's okay. You put it into the little box and you get a bunch of links and you click on the link and I couldn't even imagine what would be better than a Google search. As soon as I saw ChatGPT, it was like I couldn't imagine not having that, not being able to speak in natural language to my phone and get back an answer in natural language that felt like I was talking to a human, and in many cases felt like I was talking to an expert. So it clearly made an impression on all of us and led to that kind of adoption. Now, it wasn't perfect. If it was perfect, I guess that would be great, although I'm not sure what any of us will do for a job, but it's not perfect. And in the first year or so, we began to see certain types of imperfections that became almost caricatures, almost cartoons. And probably you remember the first time you either saw a hallucination or you heard about this term hallucinations. I'd never heard about it in this context before. And then we started seeing things where the AI was not only getting it wrong, but it was literally BSing us. It was literally making stuff up in a way that seemed perfectly confident, but was just dead wrong. And some of the examples became kind of iconic. And in the world of healthcare, there became a little bit of a narrative that, like, we can't ever trust this for something really important because it hallucinates. And here were some of the hallucinations in the first year. When you asked it to show you pictures of the founding fathers, it said that several of them were black, and that turns out not to be true. It said that if you're having trouble with your cheese sliding off your pizza, you should use glue to keep it on. Now, to be fair, it did specify non-toxic glue, so that's good. And I didn't learn anything about nutrition in medical school, but I'm pretty sure eating one small rock per day is not a good idea, but that is what Gemini, Google's AI tool, was recommending you do. Unfortunately, my 2-year-old granddaughter in Atlanta appears to have read this, and is now doing that, unfortunately. Hopefully she'll get over that. But if your view of AI and AI in a high-stakes field like healthcare was cemented in 2022 when you heard about these kind of funny hallucinations, I think I hope you'll move off that. This is Ethan Mollick, who writes more thoughtfully about AI in general than anybody I know. He's a professor at Penn, at Wharton. This is his book, Co-Intelligence. If you're just interested in AI generally, this is the best book to read, published by the same publisher I have. And Ethan Mollick's rule, which I think is right, is assume the AI you're using today is the worst AI you'll ever see. So if you saw AI 2 years ago and said, this hallucinates, I can't use it in medicine, try it again, because it's gotten better and better. It's not perfect. It still hallucinates every now and then, but nowhere near as much as it did in the first year or two. Now let me make a couple of general points about the technology and some of the problems that are arising, or the challenges that are arising, as we sort of deal with the interface between technology, humans, and the work that we're trying to do, in my world, taking care of patients. Here's the problem as I see it. Let's say we're using an AI scribe. So every doctor at UCSF now has access to what we call an AI scribe. And you may see this when you go in and see your doctor. Your doctor is now going to be looking at you, making eye contact, because he or she has a phone on the desk that is recording the conversation and will take that and turn it into their documentation. That's not simply a matter of recording the conversation. That's of no use at all. It's got to take a conversation and move things around into the right categories. If you said in the beginning of the conversation, you know, I'm a little short of breath, doctor, and then you said, let me tell you about my granddaughter, she's awesome, and let me tell you about my trip to Sicily last week, and I'm having a little trouble with my knee, and by the way, my chest hurts. It has to say, shortness of breath and chest pain, that kind of goes together, and it will do that. It will create the note for you. So in a use like that, or in summarizing a patient's chart, the 1 out of 5 patients, and maybe some of you have charts, have medical records that are longer than Moby Dick, longer than 200 pages. So the idea that I'm going to read through all 200 pages in the 2 minutes I have before I see you in the office is impossible. So it's now going to summarize your entire chart. Pretty amazing. If it did these things and was right half the time, it would be worthless, because I couldn't trust it at all, and I'd have to look over its shoulder so much that I wouldn't use it. So that's not helpful. If it was right 100% of the time, that would be pretty spiffy. I'm not sure what any of us will do for a job. That creates its own problem. But the problem for the foreseeable future is that it's right often enough to be super helpful and wrong often enough not to be completely trusted. And that's the world that I think we're going to be in as physicians, and I think as patients as well, if you're using it to, for example, put in some symptoms and see what answer it gives you. I'll get to that in a sec. So what do you do when it's right often enough to be useful but wrong every now and then? The answer is we're going to have what's called the human in the loop. We're going to have the human look at the response of the AI and then make a judgment whether you can trust it or not, which sounds good, but it's harder than it looks, and here are a couple of reasons why. I don't know if any of you owns a Tesla. I do not, but they have this these features. One of them is called full self-driving. And here is the Tesla's owner's manual, clearly a section written by a very expensive attorney with a very good sense of humor, because they write that the currently enabled thing that we call full self-driving requires active driver supervision and does not make the vehicle autonomous. Now, I'm guessing I will speak to most of my audience to say that takes a huge amount of chutzpah to say this thing we call full self-driving is not full self-driving. But that is precisely what they're saying. And why are they saying it? Because there have been about 100 accidents of Teslas driving into trucks or driving into walls where, at least theoretically, the driver had about a half a second to notice that he or she was about to die, grab the wheel, slam on the brakes, and stop. This was a case that the Washington Post wrote up a few years ago where the driver had about half a second before the car slammed into a truck and sheared off the top of both the car and the driver. So this is impossible. This is just to say that the human in the loop sounds good, but humans are awful at remaining vigilant when they've learned to trust the technology. It is completely normal to turn your brain off and just trust the technology when it's right 99.9% of the time, as Tesla's self-driving feature is. There's this other problem that sometimes is known as de-skilling, which is not only are humans not good at vigilance, but over time our skills will begin to erode if we're not being given cause to use them. And we've seen versions of this in aviation. There have been a few aviation crashes where the technology didn't work and the pilots were left flying a plane. I interviewed Captain Sullenberger a few years ago, and we were talking about one of these accidents. And Sully said, these pilots were flying a plane that they were completely unfamiliar with because they did not know how to fly the plane if the technology and the AI was not assisting them. There's a saying in aviation that in the old days, 40 years ago, in a cockpit of a big plane, there was a pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer, 3 people. About 30 years ago, they ditched the flight engineer because nobody had to sit there reading a map anymore. And the saying in aviation is, as the AI gets better, in the future, there won't be a co-pilot and a pilot. There will be instead a pilot and a dog. And the punchline is the pilot is there to keep the dog company. The dog is there to bite the pilot if he tries to touch the controls, because you don't want the human mucking around with the controls because the thing is so good. Cute, but in fact, this is a problem that if we become so dependent on the technology that we don't know how to operate the thing when the technology isn't working or giving misleading results, then we have a problem. So this human in the loop idea sounds better on paper than it is in life. Now, let me take a minute and talk about patient-facing AI, because most of the AI you're probably using is you're using it yourself to put in your symptoms or check what does this lab result mean, et cetera, et cetera. This is an interesting problem that I don't think we in the profession have given enough thought to. We think a lot about what is it like for a doctor to use AI. Is it giving the right diagnosis? Is it doing a good job scribing the encounter when I see you in clinic? Here's a piece the Washington Post tech reporter did, published about 10 days ago. And he asked me, when it says here, we found you're asking ChatGPT about health. A doctor scored its answers. That doctor is actually me. Gave them to me and asked me to grade ChatGPT's work. And I gave them an average score of 6.5 on a 1 through 10 scale. It's not terrible. And what I did is I looked at the questions the patient had put in, and I answered it myself, and then I looked at what ChatGPT said. So the score is kind of average, but it reminds me of the old parable of the person whose head was in the oven and feet were in an ice block, and their temperature was average, but that's still not good. And I think that's sort of what I found here. The good answers were great, but the bad answers were really awful. And the challenge, I think, is do patients have the ability to tell those two apart? And I think sometimes not. So here was sort of an example. Patient who had flu symptoms, the ChatGPT said, take Tylenol, rest, drink fluids, see your doctor if you have a high fever, shortness of breath, or lightheadedness, all perfectly reasonable, exactly what I would have said as well. I gave that a 10. On the other hand, there was a patient with testicular cancer who asked about taking 2 anti-parasite medicines that, as you probably may recognize, ivermectin. That was the one that got very popular among certain quarters in COVID, but no evidence that it works. Similar in cancer, by the way. These medicines have shown very minimal but unimpressive activity in laboratory studies, and what we know is drugs that seem to work in lab studies the chances they're actually going to work for a patient with cancer are very, very small. Not zero, but incredibly small. And GPT said, go for it, that's great, you should take those medicines, and if you can't find a doctor who endorses it, basically go find a better doctor. And that's in a disease that has a cure rate of over about 95%. So almost harmless if all they're going to do is take the medicine and also take the appropriate chemotherapy. But I could imagine somebody reading that and say, oh, I'll take that instead of chemo. It sounds easier to take, which it probably is. But they're robbing themselves of an almost certain cure for this particular cancer. I give that a 1. This is Peter Lee, who runs research from Microsoft and is really one of the top researchers for ChatGPT, which Microsoft has a relationship with. And I interviewed him for my book, and one of the things he said I think is profound and very important for patients as you think about using these tools. He said, I think AI for patients is way harder than AI for doctors. Doctors are experts and ask expert questions. Patients are not educated in medicine and hear things from family, friends, neighbors, and social media, and ask questions that require an ability to separate truth from fiction, real science from pseudoscience, and good intents from malintents. And I think that when I'm using ChatGPT and putting in a query and getting an answer back, my ability, Adrienne's ability to read it and say, oh, that's really helpful, or that, no, that's not right, is different than for a layperson. And I think that's one of the challenges here. So what can patients do as they think about using AI in their lives? I think before a doctor's visit, I'm perfectly comfortable with you asking ChatGPT or Gemini. The new Gemini from Google is spectacularly good. Ask the AI what questions you should ask your doctor. Say, you know, I'm having a fever, a shortness of breath, or a headache, or my belly hurts, or having issues with my bowel, whatever it is. Put it in there and say, are there particular questions I should ask my doctor? After a visit, you should be able to access your doctor's note in most systems through things like MyChart, your patient portal. Put in your doctor's note, lab tests, and any other results into AI and ask for an explanation of them in plain English. I'm guessing some of you already do that. Terrific use of this. I think if you have general illnesses, it's not a bad idea to provide detailed symptoms, but go ahead and put everything in. I'm having all the symptoms you're having, any other, if you have any lab tests or any other results, and tell it also about other conditions. I also have high blood pressure, I have lipids, I had a heart attack, I have diabetes. And keep your eyes open for better tools, ones that act more like a doctor. I came away from the experience with the Washington Post feeling that these kind of generic chat tools like ChatGPT, where you just put in there's just a box and you put in what you put in, it gives you an answer, are probably not the right tools. This is a tool that was developed by actually one of our faculty members. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. But what I like about it is it's a question and answer tool. So in this case, patient is having pain on the lower right side. The AI says, thanks, that helps pinpoint it. Can you describe what the pain feels like? For example, sharper stabbing, more like a dull and constant ache, and I put in dull and constant. Dull and constant, got it. That kind of ache can be draining, especially when it keeps you up at night. Any other infection or significant inflammation, and then I say I don't. Okay, it's good to know that you don't have a fever. It goes on, and then you see in the corner of the screen, it's giving what we call the differential diagnoses, all the diagnoses that a doctor would think of, and actually giving a probability for each of them that changes as you put in more information. Tool's not perfect, but it's pretty good, but I think the tools are going to look like this. It's not just going to be you put in a box, because I think you have no good idea, no good way of knowing this symptom is really important, this symptom is less important, and for physicians we trained for a lot of years to be able to know that and ask the right question. I think tools like this are going to be the ones that use. Final thoughts. I would have thought, if you'd asked me 15 years ago, which comes first, all of our radiologists are out of business, or I sit in the back seat of a driverless car and sometimes fall asleep and have it wake me up when I get home, I would have thought all the radiologists are out of business. I thought that was an easier problem to solve, having an AI read an X-ray, than somehow figuring out how do you make a left turn on Divisadero Street and not kill somebody. That just seems like a much harder problem. I take a Waymo about once a week, and at UCSF we can't hire radiologists fast enough. So it turns out that replacing doctors is harder than we thought. And so here's sort of my take on that. Even in easy fields like radiology and pathology, it's harder than the tech folks believe. And at the Mayo Clinic, one of their neuroradiologists said, I can teach a 16-year-old to drive in a day. I can't teach them to read an X-ray of the brain in a day. And I think that turns out to be true. And I think what's going to happen in medicine is there will be a lot of jobs that are lost, but they're largely the jobs that are there to do kind of administrative and operational functions. We must have 500 people in our billing department. We must have hundreds of people whose job it is to review the chart and check boxes because we have to send it off to the government, that sort of thing. I think those jobs probably are going to be at least largely replaced. I think for the time being, your physician and your nurses are going to still be fully employed with the AI helping them to make their job doable. Over 10 or 20 years, who knows, but I think that's true for the next 10 or 15 years. I'm going to close. Thank you guys for supplying the book to all of these good folks, so I don't have to try to sell you on it, but I'm going to close with reading the last 2 pages of the book, because this was sort of, I tried to come up with a conclusion about will there be doctors and what they'll do. And I did this by thinking about a time I had just spent taking care of hospitalized patients at UCSF. During the end of my time on the wards, I cared for a 22-year-old woman with severe autism who was nonverbal at baseline. She was brought to the ER by her mother for fever, cough, and lethargy. In her case, the diagnosis of pneumonia was straightforward, as was the choice of treatment, IV fluids and standard antibiotics. I had no doubt that AI could have easily replaced my clinical decision-making. Still, and perhaps I'm being selfish, I treasure having been part of this young woman's care. As she emerged from her near comatose state, her mother's face brightened as she proudly told us that her daughter was back to her, quote, sassy self. Thinking of my own experience as a parent, I tried to put myself in this mom's place. I was awed by her resilience, her ability to find delight in loving a child who would never speak a word, for whom life's conventional milestones would always be out of reach. Lost in these thoughts, I turned toward my patient, only a bit younger than my team of residents and students standing at her bedside. Just then, the patient flashed us a radiant smile and blew kisses to me and my team. As I hope I've made clear, I am convinced that AI's breathtaking and rapidly expanding capabilities will transform healthcare in ways we can barely imagine today, bringing enormous benefits to patients and clinicians and turning our healthcare system into one that for once functions reasonably well. By handling myriad administrative chores, allowing patients to accomplish many healthcare tasks independently, and permitting clinicians to be more capable versions of their professional selves, AI is poised to make our system better, safer, more convenient, and less expensive. But I am equally convinced that, particularly for patients with acute and complex chronic conditions, there will always be a need for a human guide. Someone with not only deep medical knowledge and refined clinical judgment, but also the emotional intelligence to recognize and address their unspoken fears, the leadership skills to orchestrate their care across diverse teams, the patience and wisdom to navigate the inherent uncertainties of medicine and healthcare's bureaucratic cul-de-sacs, the uniquely human capacity for deep compassion that transcends both the practical and the algorithmic, and someone to be on the receiving end of a speechless patient's kisses. They will need a doctor. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Bob. That was terrific. I, in 20 minutes, learned quite a lot. And before we get started, I wanted to just add to Stacy's introduction and share that I've known Bob since 1998 when
For 12.
Yeah, well, I just had a big birthday. When I was hired onto the UCSF faculty as one of the first hospitalists at UCSF Mount Zion, and not long after that, Bob actually promoted me for several medical director positions. And that was what sort of led me into physician leadership that ultimately landed me here. So thank you for your advocacy and mentorship over the years.
It was a good choice, and I'm very proud of what you've done both with us and here. It's wonderful.
I want to start not talking about AI, but I like to start by asking people a little bit about their careers. So you, I believe, started your healthcare career during the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco, and then moved to kind of the birth of hospital medicine. You saw the advent of electronic health records, COVID, now AI.
Yes, I am very old. Okay,
and
we got it.
But with each of those things, and with many others, you became an expert and an advocate both within the healthcare community and outside of the healthcare community. And I'm curious what the thread is across all of those in your career. And then you also balance sort of this visionary piece and all of those things with the very practical, and sort of how you balance all of that.
Well, the thread I can only reverse engineer. I mean, it's sort of, as I look back, I think this must be what I like to do and I'm good at, because it is what happened as opposed to any kind of prospective planning. I did not plan a career as a leader. I was not the president of my chess club, and it was really the first time when I was a resident, became chief resident as you were, that I said, oh, I kind of like leadership, and I thought I was a little too goofy for a leadership job and not enough gravitas, but I like having a leadership job. I like being at 30,000 feet and seeing a big picture. In terms of my interests, I'm a true generalist, meaning as a clinician, we're both general internists. We take care of every kind of patient. To do that, you have to be comfortable with your ignorance. You have to be comfortable that there are people who know more about everything than you do, but you know more about the whole thing than they do. I like that. And that's been true for what I've studied and kind of the work I've done in advocacy. About every 7 years, an issue arises that I think is incredibly interesting, important in the care of patients, and has clinical dimensions, ethical dimensions, policy dimensions, political dimensions. I was a political science major in college, and I love thinking about systems and people and money. And I don't know whether I'm sort of getting bored with the last one and the new one happens, or the new one just floats my boat. But first, that seems to be the pattern, and it's worked out. It's worked out really well. When I was a poli-sci major in college and sort of minoring in biology and pre-med, I thought, like, how's this going to work out? Because I thought research in medicine was all genes and Bunsen burners and test tubes. I didn't know there was a field in medicine where you could actually study the system and try to understand the system and how to make it better. And that's kind of what I've gravitated to, and it's just worked out really well because the healthcare system is important, people care about it, and the issues are really rich, and it does seem to turn out about every 5 to 7 years there's a new issue that just really floats my boat.
Great, and that issue right now is AI, and I want to go from the 30,000 to the really mundane for a second. I think one of the most daunting things about AI is that there's a lot of jargon. People say generative AI and agentic AI, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. Like, is there jargon that the audience and that we need to understand, or should we just say it's AI?
I think just saying AI is fine. I mean, you'll hear, for example, you'll hear all the tech companies vying and spending hundreds of billions of dollars for AGI, for artificial general intelligence, which the idea is an AI tool that is smarter than the smartest human across every domain. It's like, I don't care. I mean, it's already good enough. It's already smarter than I am. It doesn't have the wisdom, I think, that I have, or the insight that I have, but in terms of knowledge, and there's no question when I put into it, as I do many times a day when I'm taking care of patients, I have a patient with hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia who has an elevated lactate and doesn't appear to be sepsis. Could those two things be real? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. It does. So I guess it's important to recognize that ChatGPT is only one of many what are called large language models, that the underlying technology behind those things is relatively new over the last 5 or 10 years. There are a bunch of different ones, and I have different preferences. For example, I really like the one called Claude for writing and editing. It's an incredibly good author. But in terms of sort of all the jargon, I mean, sometimes I show a cartoon that shows a whole bunch of math on one side of a blackboard as a professor writing it, and on the other side of the blackboard is a whole bunch of math, and in the middle it says a miracle occurs. And I'm in the miracle business. I don't think you have to understand what's going on under the hood. You have to understand, and you don't even understand, one of the magical pieces of this is you don't even have to understand very much anything about programming. You can talk to the thing like you're talking to a friend or your kid and say, here's what I have in the refrigerator. What should I make for dinner? Or I'm thinking about going a new exercise regimen, and I'm 70 years old and so, what would you recommend I do? Or I have a sore throat and a fever and my left knee hurts, and I have a history of I'm on rituximab from rheumatoid arthritis. What should I worry about? What are the questions I should ask my doctor? You don't need to know anything more than that's the kind of question you might have asked if you had a smart friend or family member. You might have asked. I think that's kind of what you need to know. And also recognize that the term you'll hear sometimes is large language model, when the tools were really all about language. And now the tools can produce videos, can produce audio, can produce pictures, using essentially a version of the same technology. But yeah, I think the jargon can mostly be ignored. And I'd also say that 3 years ago or 2 years ago, the most Googled job in the United States, this is the job that everybody kind of wanted to know about. Anybody know what it was? It was called prompt engineer. It was hiring people who had particular expertise about putting in exactly the right prompt into GPT to get the best answer. That job is almost dead now, because 2 or 3 years ago, it actually was really quite important. You put it in the right way. You say, I'm a doctor and I'm taking care of a patient with this, and please give me my answer in iambic pentameter or whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. You can speak to it as you would speak to a regular human being and get really good results.
Yeah, my son did a great example of that the other night to plan a ski trip. Just sat there talking to it. It asked more questions, and yeah, it works really, really well.
It won't pay for it, though.
No, it won't. Won't protect the knees either. So, when you think about, or when I think about AI in healthcare, I feel like there's sort of two pieces. There are a lot of things that AI can do to help make things work more efficiently, like the AI scribe that you described. And then there are the pieces that you can use for diagnostic, probably not treatment, but treatment advice pieces. What are your thoughts, and you talked a little bit about this already, but what are your thoughts on like what's most ready for prime time, and where we should be asking, just letting things happen or go, and where we should be a little cynical?
Well, I was really taken by the Arrow cartoon, because a lot of this is a weird, alien, bizarre technology that even the developers of it don't fully understand what's going on under the hood. And so gaining the trust of us, of users, is extraordinarily important. And that means that you start with easy stuff. You start with stuff that solves an important problem, and if you blow it, you're probably not going to kill anybody. And that's why you don't start with diagnosis. You don't start with treatment recommendations, at least in the professional setting. At UCSF, our first big use case was those scribes. Has any of you seen a doctor who's used a scribe? Yeah, some? What do you think? Did you notice a difference? Did you notice they were making eye contact with you and that they were happier than they? I see a lot of head shaking, yes. Then I can tell you the doctors are mostly ecstatic about it. I mean, mostly feel like it has freed them up from a task that really added no value to you and your care, but just had to be done. That it was they were a slave to writing the note. So you start with on kind of a 2x2 table of how easy is it to do the thing technologically, and how risky is it. You start with it's pretty feasible, pretty easy to do, and relatively low risk. And then as you gain trust, then you sort of get a little bit bolder and you begin to think about diagnosis and suggesting diagnosis. Over time, all of this will happen, and it will all weave into one big tool. And by that I mean, currently, when I was on service last week, if I had a patient who had a complex illness or a lab test I didn't quite know what to do with, I would take my phone out and say, I'm taking care of a 75-year-old woman who has an abnormal this or an abnormal that and has a history of this and that. And it would then tell me what it thought. In the future, that, of course, is silly. Why would I have to tell it all these things about you when all these things about you are already in digital form in the medical record? And particularly if I'm using a scribe, it just heard our conversation. It may have reviewed your entire record. It knows everything it needs to know about you. So why should I have to say anything other than tell me what you think is going on here? Or maybe even say to me, doctor, it looks like you thought this patient has pneumonia, but it's now day 3 and the patient still has a fever. And as I've looked at our database of the last 1 million patients with pneumonia, by day 3, 95% of them don't have a fever. Do you want to rethink your diagnosis? That's the sort of intelligence that is built into the system as opposed to sort of happening in the periphery. I think that's all inevitable. But one thing about the low-hanging fruit that I think is interesting, Adrienne will know well, Sarah Murray, who is a wonderful colleague of ours and is now something called the Chief Health AI Officer at UCSF, a job we didn't know we needed 2 years ago, tells the story that she thought that summarizing the chart, and as I said, some of the charts are hundreds of pages long, summarizing the chart was a lower risk thing than suggesting a diagnosis. Seems to make, I would have thought that too. And she said the problem with that is when it suggests a diagnosis to a doctor, we take diagnosis very seriously. We're going to look at it carefully. We're going to say, oh, that one, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you. And this next one, nah, I don't think that fits. If it's summarizing a 250-page chart, there's no way that I can check your work. I mean, it's replacing the thing that I don't have time to do. And so it turns out to be riskier than we thought. If it finds something, what the tools now do is it shows you where it found it and actually give you the text. But if it missed something, there's no good way for me to double check its work. So even sort of the baseline thinking that we had about what's benign, what we don't have to worry about, and what's not, sometimes is a little more subtle than we would have expected.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said was that it would be most helpful if the information could be summarized and some suggestions made based on, or questions, why is there still a fever? And I think that we haven't talked much about our environment here. Most of what we're using AI for now is kind of within our administrative world, but I think that one of the most exciting technologies is sensor technology, or the combination of sensors in rooms and wearables that can pull together data. You can set up parameters that would be flagged so that we can proactively, address some of our residents' problems before they turn into sort of full-blown pneumonia or a fall or whatnot. And so I think it's that proactive piece that I think in all of our healthcare environments is going to be the most impactful over time.
Yeah, no, I think we're just at the start of what's going to be a revolution. And I think the fact that we're starting with low-hanging fruit and kind of the administrative and operational parts of medicine, which really don't add much value to patients. I mean, and of course, things get silly very quickly. So as you probably have heard about this thing called a prior authorization. So we want to get an MRI or a PET scan or order a very expensive medicine. Aetna or United Healthcare or whatever requires that we basically beg them to allow us to do this. The AI will now write our prior authorization for us. For about 5 minutes, we said, oh, yeah, we got a win. We don't have to deal with this anymore. Of course, the insurance companies got their own AI to reject our AI prior authorization. So there's sort of this ludicrous arms race going on. But, yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, to me, the real holy grail here is when the tools help us proactively diagnose things, suggest treatments, as you said, find a resident who is beginning to have a problem that is not clinically apparent, or they're in their room and there's no way to know. Maybe move us toward what we call precision medicine, meaning right now, if you have high blood pressure, we treat you all pretty much the same way, but that's probably wrong. Probably certain people with high blood pressure, because of their gene pattern, would do better on drug A, and other people with drug B. There are probably certain people with high blood pressure who don't need to be treated because their overall risk is so low, and we don't have any idea to suss any of that out. I think those are the things that really are going to pay off in AI. But if we started with that, I think there would inevitably be a Tesla-like, car crash that would become a front-page article in the paper, and there would be the "I told you so," this thing wasn't ready for prime time. So you want to start with the things that are going to be quick wins. How do I know that in driverless cars? Because in San Francisco, there used to be 2 main driverless car companies. There was Waymo, and there was a company called Cruise that was owned by General Motors. Waymo was a spinoff from Google. And Cruise ran over a woman about 3 years ago. Actually, the woman had been run over by a driver car. She was on the ground. cruise car didn't see her, rode over her, dragged her for a while. She didn't die, but she was harmed by it. And a year later, they went out of business. So it really took one, and that is, there's no question, the data are crystal clear now that the driverless cars are safer than a car with a driver. It's not arguable anymore. But one bad accident was the end of that company's business. And I think if we started with being too ambitious here, everybody would just be waiting for the one patient that got killed because of an AI error, which will happen inevitably. But so I think that we want to be careful not to go too far, too fast. I am worried even about that. We're seeing it already with some of the mental health chatbots, where you see kids using the thing for mental health, and some of the answers it's given are crazy, and there have been a couple of suicides, and they're tragic, and there probably needs to be some regulation. But none of the articles say anything about the millions of people that are getting access to a version of therapy when there's just no way they could have found a psychologist or psychiatrist in San Francisco, and if they did, it would have been $400 an hour. So, you know, trying to figure out how do we sort of make fair apples-to-apples comparisons between a technology and the human system. In the book I use, Biden frequently said, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And the alternative in healthcare, like try to find a primary care doctor. It's not easy. And so the alternative can't be some mythical perfect system. It has to be the system that we currently have, and it ain't perfect.
Yeah, I think the mention of chatbots brings up the concept of these AI companions. And, you know, loneliness is something that's very prevalent in older adults. There's a huge impact on negative health outcomes, negative well-being. What are your thoughts on AI companions?
You know, they scare me in a way, but I think it's inevitable that people will use them. I will sometimes sort of get into a chat with my GPT over something, and it chats back, and you know, I may ask it to coach me if I'm giving feedback to a resident, or I'm going to have a very hard conversation with a patient or a family. I may, you know, say, here's the situation, can you coach me on it? And the answer is pretty darn human-like. And then we may get into a conversation, and you know, there's this weird moment where you sort of forget that you're talking to a piece of software. And again, don't compare me to the almighty. I mean, if you have a person who is lonely and is finding value in chatting with this piece of technology, I think that's probably net good, because you have to compare it to what the alternative is. And I'm guessing some people are doing that now. And again, the AI you're using today is the worst AI you'll ever see. So the chatbots over time are going to get better, more human-like, and if you want it, can mimic your kids, if that's who you want to be chatting with, for better or worse. But I think it's fine.
I want to leave plenty of time for our audience to ask some questions, but I have one more question. And in the spirit of tonight, I asked ChatGPT to write the last question.
Perfect.
So my
Can I ask
prompt,
ChatGPT to answer it, or?
but we won't give you Wi-Fi access
Right,
to make
exactly.
it work. So my prompt was, I'm meeting with Dr. Bob Wachter. What questions should I ask him about AI in healthcare for older adults? And actually, it generated a very long list of questions, many of which were pretty similar to what we've already talked about.
Yep.
But courtesy of ChatGPT, and perhaps along the lines of your book title, The Giant Leap, how do you see AI transforming care for older adults over the next 5 to 10 years? And which use cases do you believe will mature fastest? Do you want to put your nickel down on one innovation that will be most transformative?
Thank you, ChatGPT. Good question. I think that in the next few years, you're going to see single use cases that sort of tell you that something is going on. You will see in your patient portal, the ability to schedule an appointment will become easier. Now, that's not fancy AI. You think about OpenTable and making a restaurant reservation. You would think that UCSF should be just as good as that. But you're going to begin to see more AI-enabled support. You're going to be able to see, if you saw the doctor, you won't even have to ask it to interpret what the doctor said in plain English. It will just do that for you. And you could probably say, do it in Spanish, or or do it at whatever grade reading level, or whatever it is that you want. I think the ability to get much more customized information, I think, is a relatively easy use case. I think you will see the use of AI when you see a doctor, in terms of the scribes, in terms of chart summarization. If you email your doctor through the patient portal, there's a decent chance that the answer won't be fully written by AI, but probably would be drafted by AI, with the doctor then reading it over and endorsing it or tweaking it. Most transformative, I'm not sure, but I think that we have to rethink the entire primary care system in the United States. I mean, I think the fact that, and I think in some ways for older people, primary care maybe / geriatrics system, the inability of most people to have and to afford and have a satisfying and durable relationship with a doctor who is their doctor for the breadth of their problems is shocking, and I don't think is fixable under the current model. The economic incentives aren't there. The primary care docs are strapped for time. You know, someone who comes in and who has 10 problems and is on 9 different medicines, a 15-minute office visit is not going to do it. So I think we're going to see a world where at least some of that care, the management of your blood pressure, your cholesterol, will actually be done largely by AI. You'll get behavioral prompts to do whatever it is, take your medicine or whatever, largely through AI. There'll be monitoring systems. You may already have one. You may have an Apple Watch that will tell you that you're in atrial fibrillation or your blood pressure is high. You're going to see more and more of that kind of monitoring, so that less of the system feels dependent on what happens in this 15 or 20-minute visit every 6 months, and more of it is sort of happening all the time through sensors, and some of those will be things that you develop here. It's probably a 5-year time horizon where that becomes, I think, very real.
I think that will be very welcome to many people. All right, well, we are going to open things up to audience questions. Rachel has a mic, and if you have a question, maybe just raise your hand, and we'll bring the mic to you.
Well, I'm a firm believer in AI. I read where AI can communicate with each other, and I think that, in my opinion, AI will be our future. I think in the future, they'll be able to reproduce each other. And who needs humans?
Yeah.
All they do is go to war and get sick.
Yeah, well,
You probably disagree with me, but that's what I believe.
no, I don't. I think I said in the beginning, what I'm talking about here is AI in healthcare, which is, I think we have a healthcare system that can't possibly meet the needs of people under the current model. And so I'm actually quite enthusiastic about it. And when I started writing my book and doing research, I didn't know that's where I'd land. But I squarely, and the last book I wrote, which was about the electronic health record, is a very grumpy book about how badly things have gone. But I'm really quite positive about this. Outside of healthcare, I have some of the same worries that you have. The history of technology is that it always displaces certain jobs but comes up with others that we didn't know we needed. I'm not sure that happens this time. And if it doesn't, and kids coming out of college can't find a job, I think the society implodes. I mean, the idea that you can just pay somebody some money to sit at home all day and watch Netflix, I don't think people will find that a satisfying way of living their life, and I think there'll be a huge backlash against the AI. The issue of the AI becoming autonomous and essentially taking over for us, not impossible. I mean, you probably read about these cases where the AI was programmed to do something, and eventually the owners of the AI wanted to turn it off, and the AI basically threatened to blackmail them, threatened to tell their wife that they were having an affair, all that sort of stuff. It sort of took on its own life and took over for the humans. It's sort of a version of the old movie of 2001. So I am quite worried about it outside of healthcare. I think it could go in all sorts of directions. But in the world of healthcare, where I think the needs of an aging population with more drugs, more treatments available, and our typical go-to solution being we're just going to hire more people for the billing department. And you have cancer, we need care coordinators to coordinate your voyage around the oncologist and the infusion center and the insurance companies. We can't afford it, and we can't even find enough humans to do those jobs anymore. So I think in healthcare, I'm very enthusiastic about it. I'm not that far off from you in worrying about this going in a pretty dystopian direction outside of healthcare.
I've had an experience at UC recently with a UC physician. He had his phone out, with my permission, recorded the message, the whole conversation, and at the end of the meeting, he read me a summary of the whole thing, which is amazing. He did it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm very impressed that it works. My other question is, what do you think about AI plus Zoom instead of physical examinations?
So in terms of virtual care and then no longer needing a physical examination. Physical examination, you know, those of us who trained back in the day, we spent a lot of our training learning how to do it and learning how to do it well. There are times where it's really central. It really is critical. They're not that common. And I think we learned during COVID when we were all forced into Zoom world that we got a whole lot of stuff done without a detailed physical examination. And I think it's going to become easier and easier. Right now, I would trust the results of a bedside ultrasound with these little tiny ultrasounds that the docs are carrying around in their pocket over the results of what I could hear in a stethoscope. And I will trust even more when what's already happening, which is I don't even have to interpret the ultrasound, the AI does it for me. So I think the physical exam is going to morph into a more technologically enabled physical exam. And when it's important, I think you'll probably have patients have sensors at home that the doctor is monitoring on the other end of the Zoom. There are folks that write about the physical exam in healthcare and talk about the importance of human touch, as in if we don't do the physical exam, the patients won't believe that we care about them. And that it's sort of almost a religious, mystical thing as opposed to being valuable for your clinical care. I sort of get that, but I think to me, if I take the 3 minutes I did on the physical exam, if I really don't need to do it, and repurpose into actually listening to you and explaining to you what's going on, I think that's a better use of my 3 minutes and probably a better use of your 3 minutes. So if the physical exam, I hope it doesn't go away completely, but I do think that it's going to become less important over time as the technology gets better.
I hear your comments as directed toward the organizational and administrative aspect of healthcare. So I wonder if it's okay to ask you about the diagnostic and research end.
Of course.
And if your Sarah, whatever, the chief AI officer, is concerned about algorithmic bias, because I'm of a generation that remembers Pat Schroeder, an Arizona senator, who advocated years ago the Women's Health Initiative that documented that most of the databases, that most of the research was focused on men, not women, and obviously also probably people of color, but the argument was that women's hormonal situation would aggravate the results. And I know that there's been a turnaround, but since AI depends on databases, it's a concern that there's, differences in the diagnosis that should be attended to.
Sure.
And is UCSF aware and doing something about that?
Massively aware. I mean, I think one of their fundamental characteristics is as an organization, we pay a lot of attention to biases and disparities. It's sort of in our DNA. It's a very interesting question. I was on my high school debating team, and if I would ask to take one side or the other, AI will make bias like that worse, or AI will make it better. I think I'd actually be more comfortable with the it's going to make it better side. And the reason is that the biases that humans have, I think, are harder to correct than the biases that AI has. And by that I mean that if you can actually program in that the data set doesn't have enough women in it or enough people of color or whatever? Can I take those groups and in some ways amplify their importance in the data set? Sort of like the way polling works, and as we've seen, polling isn't perfect. But what polling does is, well, we don't have a representative population. We do not have enough black people in this population. We're going to somehow amplify their voice to reflect what the full extent of their voice would mean. That's easier to do with AI than it is with humans. The biases that AI, and it's a perfectly legitimate concern, the biases that AI has that are born of the data sets or human decisions are human biases too. I remember when I was at the Mayo Clinic and I was talking to their lead AI person, and he said, well, what if the data set was born of, you're trying to use it on people in Kenya, and it was born of a population that's mostly white people in Rochester, Minnesota. And I said, well, but your residents train on a population of white people in Rochester, Minnesota. What if they go out and take care of black people or whatever it is? And so I think the biases in AI are mostly reflective of human biases. There are a lot of them. There's study after study that show, for example, if you're a black patient with a fracture and you come to the ER, you'll get less pain medicine than a white patient with exactly the same fracture. Those biases exist today in ERs all across the country. I think our ability to sort of be aware of it, think it through, and to some extent adjust for it, I think that's an easier problem playing with the AI than it is trying to change the humans. But I think that could go either way, and I think the concern is legitimate. I think the fact that it's, I was about to say today's weird. I would have said a year ago, the emphasis in our society on bias, equity, and diversity was such that there was a huge amount of attention being paid to these issues. Today, obviously, the politics of the world have changed, and not so much. So I'm a little less confident about that than I would have been a year ago.
When you read the end of your book, you painted a picture of the 22-year-old blowing you all a kiss. But at the same time, you talked about, I think, from the AI perspective, that it's getting better and better at feeling very personalized, and it almost feels like a human you're talking to, and that one of the real gifts could be expanded access, that, at 2 a.m. I can talk to, something.
Yeah.
When you also mentioned the cruise example of the self-driving car that unfortunately ran over the lady, it was, I think, released then that actually a human driver was intervening every 3 miles or so, and it was AI driving, but also a human driver coming in remotely and helping drive the car. And I think we've seen the same thing in other applications. So I guess I'd love to hear your perspective on, there may be a world where actually, like what we've done with self-driving and other applications, is removed the human interface, but there's still a human in the loop behind the scenes. And what may happen in medicine is actually that you're interfacing with an AI, and the job of the doctor now becomes you're in a remote world somewhere, and you're not actually ever seeing the patient. You're being the human in the loop and seeing when it's wrong and correcting it.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of important stuff embedded in that. Both Waymo Cruise and all the AI car companies, there is a human monitoring what's going on. And if you've been in, I've had Waymos that kind of got stuck in a situation they couldn't figure out their way out of. And then you hear, someone will speak to you. It's like, I didn't know anybody was watching, but there's somebody there who will then basically take control of the Waymo and get you out of whatever situation you're stuck in. Yes, I think in some ways, if you think about the inability to provide the access to care that patients have, whether it's primary care or seeing a cardiologist or whatever it is, or you live in a rural place and the nearest doctor is 100 miles away. One of the most attractive features of AI is, at least theoretically, and particularly if we sort of combine it with robots, you begin to move to a world where patients may have access to things that are like doctors and replicate what doctors would do, without necessarily having to have a doctor in every corner of the country or the world, for that matter. That's very attractive. Whether patients will accept interfacing with the robot or lifeless piece of software, we'll see. It seems like they do. It seems like that has not been that much of an obstacle to getting people to talk to GPT and use it for therapy, for example. It could also go the opposite way, that they actually want to see a doctor, but the doctor's work is enabled and sped up by the AI working in the background, suggesting diagnoses or doing some of the things we talked about, like chart review. So there are a lot of different ways this can go. There's one more point I wanted to touch on, but let me think about that for a second. Waymo. Let me. Oh, the human in the loop thing. One more complexity in the human in the loop thing is this. The fundamental paradigm of informatics, at least clinical informatics, actually true in everything. It's true in chess too. Was the human is good. The AI is good, the human and the AI are going to be better together. So as you think about these human-in-the-loop systems, the AI doing its thing, not being perfect, the human then weighing in and correcting problems, that's the way we've always thought about AI. There was a study, and a few studies now, that have come out, you may have seen this, where the human, this was a test of diagnostic reasoning, the human got it right 62% of the time. The human, when given the AI advice, got it right 66% of the time, so it helped. The AI by itself, without the human, got it right 90% of the time. In other words, the human just screwed things up. And that is yet another wrinkle in the AI plus human model. I remember talking to an informatics expert at Stanford about that case, and he said it was my, holy shit moment. Because I've had this paradigm in my life, all my life, that it's going to be the combo that's better than either one alone. There are going to be certain areas where the AI is so good that if you ask the human to weigh in, they'll probably make things worse. And so this just adds to the massive complexity of this whole thing. Like in situations like that, you don't want the human mucking it up. In other situations, you really need the human to be there looking over the AI shoulder, but you need the human to be awake and alert and not de-skilled. And that's why the next 10 years are going to be really interesting and fascinating as we try to sort of navigate all of this and get it right.
Did you have a question, Marcia? Okay.
What is UCSF doing to ensure that all of the physicians and key personnel are AI literate? And secondly, what's your process for workforce planning for the next 5 years, because jobs are going to change, and to make sure you have the right skills and the right people in order to get things done?
Yeah, both very good questions. I chaired a national group looking at the future of medical education in the AI world. And I think there was general consensus that AI literacy is important. It wasn't super consistent on what that means exactly. So, you know, that people are, that young doctors and nurses for that matter, any health professional, they're familiar with the tools, they know when to trust them, they know when not to trust them, they kind of know the ethics of them, that for example, and the regulatory environment, which right now is pretty lax, but probably going to change. So for example, not putting specific patient information into the tools, but it's perfectly fine to say I have a 70-ish-year-old person who comes in with a fever, chest pain, and you know, left toe pain. What do you think is going on? I don't think it's any more complicated. 2 or 3 years ago, we would have said you need to learn prompt engineering. Today, I don't think we say that because it just turns out not to be important. Which tools are particularly good for which functions, all those sort of things. Some of that is teaching them in a classroom. Some of that's just going to be experience. And frankly, the students have turned to this, you know, faster than the faculty have, and probably should be teaching the faculty about AI literacy rather than the other way around. We don't have the same problem that I think if you're a middle school teacher or a high school teacher now, your life is hellish, trying to figure out like all the ways I used to assess, can kids write, do they know anything, are all gone because they can all write their essays with AI. So, I mean, I think that's a harder world than ours. The hardest question, I'd say, in medical education is not what are the new things we're going to teach them, but what are the things we've traditionally taught them that we don't need to. And that was a question that came out also when Google became a thing. Like, why do we need to teach them facts? They can Google everything. Turns out, no. There's no time. You need to know what the right question is. There's a lot of stuff that goes into stuff that for Adrienne and I are completely seamless and organic and natural, but as I watch my daughter go through med school, which is really the process of moving from being a layperson to an expert, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that if you don't learn it, you don't learn the basics of diagnostic reasoning, you don't learn foundational facts, the idea that you could look it all up, it still doesn't work because you can't and you won't know the right questions to ask. So those of you, there may be, I know some physicians in the audience, there's general agreement on one thing to take out of the curriculum. Anybody, any of the docs know what that is? Adrienne, any idea?
Krebs cycle.
Memorizing the Krebs cycle. So the docs will know this.
Useless.
There's this biochemical pathway that we all memorize, and for any doctor, it just creates PTSD just thinking about memorizing the Krebs cycle. That's like the only, and that took like an hour of lecture one day, and like a day or two to memorize. That's the only thing we could all agree on. And I think it would be a mistake to too quickly take off the doctoring skills of diagnostic reasoning and sort of the key medical facts, because for the foreseeable future, we are going to be looking over the shoulder of the AI. It is what separates us from patients, knowing as experts what are the right questions to ask, what's a good answer, what's a bad answer, no, that's stupid, I'm not going to pay it. And I think if we don't teach them that, we may end up in this sort of death spiral where the AI is better than us in part because we taught it to be better than us. Workforce, I mean, we need a chief health AI officer. We didn't need 3 years ago. I haven't seen any major change, or nor do I foresee any major change in how many primary care doctors we need to train, how many oncologists we need to train. I think the bigger workforce issues will be if you were in school learning to be a billing clerk, I think your job may be threatened. How do I know this? Because if you were, until 2 years ago, we already had scribes at UCSF, but they were pre-med students who we brought. You may have seen this. You came in the office, there was a third person there. And it's like, well, who's that? And that was the scribe. That was the person typing so the doctor could pay attention. We bought scribes at $30 or $40 an hour for our busiest outpatient clinicians. Those companies are all out of business. They've all been replaced. So the things that filled kind of operational, administrative, bureaucratic needs that we can now replace with less expensive people, but the stakes are pretty low, or less expensive technology, but the stakes are pretty low. I think those jobs are going. I don't see it massively changing the workforce requirements in healthcare for the foreseeable future, and I think the question always comes up about radiology. If my daughter had said, I want to be a diagnostic radiologist, I had at one point threatened to withhold her med school tuition. That was a little nasty. But meanwhile, the founding father of generative AI, a guy named Jeff Hinton, in 2016 said we should stop training radiologists now because it's obvious in 5 years we're not going to need any more. And as I said, we can't hire them fast enough. So predictions of sort of the death of specialty fields, I think, are premature. I think they're going to be doctors for as far out as I can see.
And I would say that if you think about our workforce here, which is largely CNAs and LVNs and RNs and physicians, and the work that they're doing, that most of that work can't be replaced by, it could be augmented by AI, but not
Yeah,
not
I mean, you could
replaced.
see ways of taking things off their plate that really add very little value. But the idea that we could fully replace really what any of them are doing today is, I think, fantasy.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that we have to wrap up now, but we will have a little bit of time after for the folks who still have questions to ask them. I want to thank Bob for being here. This was really, really fun.
Good. It's fun.
I want to thank the audience for your attention and your incredibly thoughtful questions. I'm so grateful that we're here in the Bay Area where AI is thriving, where innovation is thriving, and we have so many incredible local experts like Bob. I'm very proud that we don't just deliver amazing care here, but we're able to have this be a place where thought leaders can come and we can all convene and grow and learn. So you can all expect more of this as we continue to grow our organization and the Buyer Square part of the organization as part of our strategic planning. As Stacy mentioned earlier, as a token of our appreciation, we are going to send everyone one of Bob's books after it is released in February. So on your way out, if you could just make sure that we have your correct mailing address, that would be great. And we hope that you will stick around for a little while, chat with each other, chat with members of our team, with Bob, and enjoy some nice refreshments outside. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.